briefly. The situation in Pakistan is that a military government was replaced after elections with a civilian government. And as you know, the leader of the party that won before that party could go to the elections was assassinated. And she bequeathed the party to her husband in her will. Democracy in Pakistan is weak, because I think this is the first time in the history of the world that a political leader has left behind a will in which he says the party belongs to his son and till he comes of age to his father. But she was, you know, praised all over the world as the angel of democracy. Now, the guy currently president of Pakistan, Asif Zardari, is, I mean, it's not a secret, is one of the most corrupt politicians in the world. Whether the Nigerian generals are worse, it's a debate. I think Zardari is ahead of them. In any case, it's a mess. But we now have a strange situation where this civilian government does whatever the United States asks it. And the military is now beginning to pose as the defender of Pakistan's national interests. It's a grim situation. The question of Pakistani nuclear weapons, which is a very big, sometimes becomes a big issue, in my opinion, could only be a serious issue if the Pakistani military split. And if the Pakistani military splits, you will have a civil war of some sort in that country. And then we can't predict the future at all, if were that to happen. What are the conditions that might lead it to happen? Continuing US drone attacks on Pakistani civilians, continuing US pressure on the Pakistani military to go and kill its own people, the spillage of the Afghan war into Pakistan. That would make it a serious issue. The notion that a small or any group of Islamic militants could capture Pakistan's nuclear facility when the army is, you know, 750,000 strong is impossible. It's impossible. It's the most heavily guarded facility in the country. 5 or 6 people know the codes. The United States has given them new safeguards, so even these codes have to be countermanded, can be countermanded. So that is largely alarmism and alarmist propaganda, often used to justify the war in Afghanistan. This is what we're doing it, and to extend the war into Pakistan. In fact, it's the continuation of the war that destabilizes Pakistan now and its institutions. That's the problem. I will come to Iran in a minute, but I can answer the questions raised by our friend at the back. About the question he raises is a very important one, that leaving aside Islamic extremism, the general growth of religiosity in the country is worrying. This is true, but this applies to the whole world. Religiosity has increased everywhere. The world's most religious country is the United States of America. That's a fact. The role of the Catholic Church in Spain is still quite significant. It dominates and controls education, for instance. Education hasn't been secularized. Here in France, you have a growth of religion. Many bright young kids at the École Normale Supérieure, who in the 70s and 60s and 80s used to be almost genetically Marxist or socialist, are now turning towards religion. So even France, the sort of home of the Enlightenment, is not immune to this process. So I think there are general reasons for this, which don't concern us here, but are interesting. So in countries like Pakistan, it is not totally surprising that this is happening. But in Pakistan, there is a cure for it. And this is what I've been arguing now for nearly 30 years. And the cure is to create a state education system, to create teachers training universities, to educate the people, to teach them English as a compulsory second language, as has been done, for instance, in Malaysia, not so far away. So they can read, so they can come to their own judgment. They don't do it. No Pakistani government from 1947 to this day has created a state education system that means anything. Same applies to certain basic social facilities, health, shelter. They don't do it. And the United States, which uses this country like a contraceptive, essentially will not put enough pressure on politicians to do these things. They don't care that much. Well, we are now paying the price. So you have a madrasa, a religious school, where education is free. It's a very limited education. They teach people to read and write. They also teach them many awful things, as religious schools tend to. But if you are a poor guy in the city or the countryside, and someone comes to you and says, how many kids do you have? You say, I have 4 or 5. Give us one of your sons and we'll educate him and we'll clothe him. And we'll take charge of him till he's 16 or 17. The Jesuits used to do it after all. The education in Jesuit schools was much better. Here it's not good education. But the principle is the same, that unless you have an alternative, people will continue to send to schools. Which is why the government has not been able to close these schools down, because they have nothing else to offer. I don't think that the war in Afghanistan, honestly, is to do with the mineral resources of the country. I don't believe that. I think it is a war now increasingly to do with global strategy. And Gordon Brown, the British Prime Minister, trying to find the reason all the European politicians who support the war have been taught, I don't know by who, some fool, to say that we are fighting this war to prevent violence on our streets in London, in Madrid, in Paris, in Berlin. But you know, the violence in the streets comes because of the war. It doesn't stop it. The suicide terrorists who blew up the underground system in London some years ago, all the British intelligence reports, some of them have been made public. They say that these guys acted in protest against Tony Blair and British foreign policy. They were still wrong, of course. But that is the cause of it. And unless you understand the cause, you can't go further.